Patient power. Britain's medical cannabis community continues to face all kinds of stigma from all sections of society. But a new organisation has been set up to support patients when authorities challenge their consumption. We meet Callum Jones, the founder of CannCare UK. I'll say hello and welcome to the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barton, mine host, or your host, or just the host. Not that I'm like a host, like a parasite host, but like a host. Well, I suppose we all are in some respects. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. Today, very much, we're focused on UK medical cannabis. And full disclosure, I am working with this organisation. A new charity has launched here in the UK, dedicated to helping patients when they encounter discrimination when they're consuming their medication. And the gentleman in charge, the CEO of CannCare, is with us today. We have Callum Jones. How you doing, sir? How you doing?
I'm not bad. How are you?
I'm all right. I mean, current time of recording, it's sunny. It's Thursday. We're right at the end of February. And, you know, like we sort of said before hitting record, I think spring's in the air and, you know, everyone else seems a bit miserable. But, you know, it's all good.
It's been one of those days today. Everyone I've spoken to has been miserable. So
Really?
First positive person.
There we go. I keep trying, and you know, I'm going to put it out there. The cannabis helps. Let's be honest. But
yeah, it does.
tell us a little bit more, because again, we've been chatting for a while. You know, I'm working with you directly, which is awesome. We had a chat. I think it's just before, well, just after New Year's, really, wasn't it? But tell us more about CannCare from yourself and from your own perspective, and what we're trying to do. And yeah, we'll go from there. So tell me.
Yeah. CannCare has been an organisation that we felt was necessary in the market, really, and across patient advocacy groups. Personally, I was a part of a few, so I've always been in the background. I've never been this big predominant figure within patient advocacy. I've never sat there and, you know, actively responded to people's messages. But, you know, advocacy as a whole was lacking in something that was more serious, in my opinion, anyway. And it felt like there was just so much bickering and so much argument, and just a little bit of, you know, an edge on the advocacy side. And for me, it was more of like taking that on board and thinking, how can we do this in a professional way that represents patients correctly and, you know, benefits patients really? And that's also, you know, why we started CannCare. But that's also mixed with a lot of personal issues, which I'm sure we'll go on to in this podcast at some point. But for full disclosure as well, I will be completely honest about my experience and why I started this. And some of it may be obviously triggering to some, but I feel like it's important to be honest exactly why I started CannCare and why I'm so passionate about what I do.
No, 100%. And I think, again, a lot of people, everyone I speak to within the industry has their own, you know, take on, you know, why they found medical cannabis to be beneficial for them or someone they care about, or, you know, generally. And I think, again, that's why I feel like the industry at large has a lot more heart than some other industries. But again, as a charity, you know, I think supporting patients when they actually, because there's not a lot of guidance and there's not a lot of awareness more broadly. I mean, there is, but it's easy to kind of think, I always think we're in this cannabis bubble in the industry. And sometimes it's hard to forget that, you know, a lot of patients really aren't. And they do face discrimination. I mean, we all do to some extent, you know, whether it be kind of a nosy neighbor sort of sniffing the air and going, smoking cannabis, you know, and they're like, well, you know, but again, that comes back to the fact that they're not doing anything wrong by consuming. You know, this is legitimate medication. It should be regarded as no different to taking other prescription medication. And, you know, we've had some success in supporting patients. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about the background behind CannCare and your own personal reason for starting it.
Sure. So my occupation before I did what I did with CannCare was the prison service, and I had a very short tenure within the prison service. It's not an industry that I would recommend to anyone. And also then went into civil service. I retired from the prison service and went straight to the civil service. And it became quite apparent that while I was in the civil service that my mental health had decreased from being in the prison service, along with obviously my own little problems as well. And I had one of these moments where I sat down on the sofa, and I'd actually been off medical cannabis for a few days because my anxiety was so bad that I thought every time I went out to vaporize, because I don't vaporize in the rented property that I'm in, I went outside to vaporize, and I was so anxious that other people would smell it. And a bit like you mentioned before, people may smell it and think, oh, that's illegal cannabis, and it's a stigma. And I sat down on the sofa, and me and my partner We have a really close relationship, and I kind of just sat there and had a really bad mental health episode where I believed that my life was, you know, it was pointless. Like I'm now written off work. I'm on benefits. I feel like I'm doing nothing with my time. And I hate just not being able to do something. And I felt like I had no purpose. And I sat there and had almost like this epiphany of like, do you know what? I can't just sit here for the rest of my life and allow anxiety and depression to take over. And I felt like doing something that would not only benefit, you know, myself, but benefit hundreds of people across the UK. And I also then kind of linked the fact that I'm scared of going out to medicate right now. And how many other people must feel like that? And how many other people are worried that stigma is going to make that, you know, that problem? And yeah, it was just this really bad mental health situation where, yeah, it got really close to me, obviously not being here to this day. And it was one of those eye openers where I really sat there and I just kind of said, you know what, I'm going to start actually advocating for medical cannabis. And I remember that, you know, from there, it really spiraled on. I went to Andrew Walters directly, had a sit down with him. And we had a good conversation. We had a conversation about how, you know, I asked him advice on how I could start my own advocacy group, what are the problems, and trying to figure out whether it was actually a widespread problem, which it is. And we all know it is at this point. And yeah, basically had a huge wake up call that really I should start doing something to benefit others. And it gave me purpose. And honestly, ever since I've started CannCare, and I work with people like Dave and amazing people like Andrew and Sophie and everyone else involved in CannCare, which is now a growing team. I think we're like over like 8 or 9 people now. It has been the most like eye-opening experience. It's been quite sad seeing some of the discrimination, but honestly, every day I wake up with a huge smile because I know that we're going to be doing lots more on that day. And every day recently has just been like a rocket skyrocketing. And it's so productive and so nice. And it finally feels like I actually have a purpose. And hearing some of the stories and, you know, even the discrimination and just hearing that patients have relief of situations that we've helped them with has been one of the most, like, I can't even explain emotionally how powerful that is to you. And I've sat there some nights and just bawled my eyes out because it's sad, but it's also good that we're giving patients that relief, and it really is satisfying.
No, 100%. No, and thank you for sharing all of that. I think, again, there isn't really anything else like that, really. I think that's probably why you sort of started it. I mean, there's a lot of kind of patient advocacy groups. There's a lot of kind of trying to raise awareness from the kind of clinics and I guess more of the medical professionals who are very much kind of involved and supportive of cannabis. But there's been very little that feels like there's anything that we can do to kind of help patients when they encounter sort of issues. So what typically, I mean, again, you're dealing with a lot of people who are facing discrimination from, I guess, public institutions, whether it be social housing, whether it be councils, landlords. What's the sort of typical scenario that people will kind of call you and ask for help with?
So almost, I'd say 90% of the cases that we ever experienced so far have been discrimination from council housing. So a lot of it is government organizations or government, you know, housing associations, where they have been basically, the council have not believed that cannabis can be prescribed medically and have tried to do some absolutely crazy practices. I think the craziest one I ever saw was they wanted to conduct a smell test to see whether the smell of cannabis was actual medical cannabis. Where's the medical evidence in that? Like, it's not even a thing.
You could smell it and determine the difference between medical and
it's yeah, a lot of it is misinformation or just not aware that medical cannabis exists. And you know, it's quite easy to go into these situations and get really angry and hostile. And CannCare's approach, as you know, I'm sure we'll go further on into, has always been reactive. And we will be reactive to the full extent. I'm not scared of approaching a council. I'm not scared of even physically going to meet them in person, to be fair, to argue with them in a meeting room. But it's just, yeah, it's an insane amount of discrimination from public government bodies, really, and it really isn't okay. A lot of private landlords are easy with it. You know, we've noticed that private landlords have actually been decent with it so far. But governments are just off the rocker. They really have no idea what they're talking about half the time.
And I think this comes back to the idea that, you know, information and education right across the board is key to, you know, but it's almost like a public awareness campaign. It still needs to sort of reach the kind of these institutions. And you know, it still staggers me that there isn't that broader awareness, you know.
Yeah, it's one of those problems that we've got, and that's exactly why we brought Andrew on board as our political advisor, because we needed somebody that had the experience that Andrew's got, you know, implementing his motion that he's implemented. And currently we're speaking to other councils about implementing that as well, and other councils. It's
what
just
the implement.
it's one of them.
Yeah, if you could explain a little bit, because I know he's a councillor. Actually, he's been on the podcast. We actually met just after Product Earth, actually. And I know he's very kind of vocal and sort of active. But tell us a little bit more about the initiatives he sort of started in Salford.
So we've started a lot in Salford. We worked with Andrew quite closely on what he was doing at the time. We, you know, gave personal opinions. And at the time when Andrew was doing the motion, I was trying to reach out through patient advocacy groups that existed at that point, trying to get patients to speak to their MPs to help further the motion so that, you know, it could get that support. But in terms of Salford, there's not been a lot of local engagement that we've done. Initially, we started CannCare as a local thing. That was the initial plan.
Based in Manchester, so it's
based in Manchester. And then we quickly, you know, it just went national. Our first case was in Crawley, put it that way. So that's nowhere near Salford. And then it was just from there we went to the UK basically, and we're just like, do you know what, we'll protect everyone because it makes sense.
But I guess this kind of approach to sort of, you know, almost educating councils, educating patients and doctors. I mean, where do you see the sort of priority in terms of where that information needs to be focused, that awareness? I mean, it's obviously across the board, but
we need to. Yeah, so I think really it should be part of a training package that councils really have. There's these inclusivity and diversity training packages that councils go through. And you would think that surely like that kind of thing is included in those packages. But again, it's, you know, the councils, and I'm, you know, if you asked any councillor, half of these packages that are made for inclusivity and diversity are made in like 2010. They weren't updated. And even though, you know, they could be updated, a lot of them won't contain information about CPPMs. And that's part of the problem. I honestly think that we should start focusing and we should start pushing local councils to include it in part of their inclusivity and diversity, because it causes discrimination. It's causing more harm than good. And it's just causing more damage to them. In fact, you know, for example, I can use this as an example because I know the patient won't mind, but, you know, a council lost quite a significant amount of money in a lawsuit recently that we assisted them in securing. And that's cost the council a lot more than it would cost them. And it's taxpayers' money. It's cost the taxpayer a lot more money to pay that client rather than updating the diversity training that would have cost them a significant chunk less. And yet they're losing, you know, like lawsuits over this kind of thing. It's just, it baffles me how that can be just, it's one of them. I can go on for hours about that, but I'll try not to go too hard on the council.
Do you feel like councils don't know what they don't know in a way? There's been no kind of broader initiative to kind of put in place awareness or education and training from, but I guess I get it. It comes down to who's motivated enough to provide that information.
It's mixed. I think the issue with councils is that a lot of the old generation, and I know that a lot of people agree with me in this, and please don't take offense if any of the older generation are involved in this or watch this podcast. I'm not targeting you, I swear. But a lot of the older generation that are in councils really have this stigma, this huge like grudge against anything that has the word cannabis in. The second you mention cannabis, that's it. Like they just switch off. And it's about trying to basically change that perception. But we have noticed that a lot of it is the older generation that has the issue.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, but it's that whole, people just don't know that it's legal. That's what it comes down to, I think, by and large. And the fact that we only have, I think it's 50,000 patients here in the UK. We're a nation of 67 million people. By contrast, someone like Australia, which has half the population, has over 500,000 patients. And it feels like anyone involved in the industry almost has a responsibility to kind of share that message. But again, I don't see the clinics necessarily doing that. We don't necessarily see doctors, you know, being forthcoming to say, well, have you tried cannabis? You know, other than in the clinics themselves, you know, there just isn't that, it's not embedded sort of culturally and, you know, in terms of sort of practice. And I guess it's not anyone's fault per se. It's just, it hasn't really been a thing really until relatively recently. I mean, what are we, 6.5 years into medical legalization here, but I reckon if you went out in the street anywhere in the UK and sort of said cannabis legal or not, people would say, well, you know, medical cannabis, they probably wouldn't even know.
And that's the issue. A lot of these companies like clinics, and you know, I've spoken to them, I've had the pleasure of speaking to quite a few people in the industry recently. A lot of them have issues advertising. You know, we've seen it. We've seen Relief do their incredibly aggressive campaign on Twitter and everywhere, which is fantastic in a way, but in a way it was one of those, it's like a 50-50 thing. But it is incredibly hard for people to advertise on Google because Google AdSense filter anything that has cannabis in automatically. And a lot of these advertising platforms, like, you know, Clear Vision and other places, we've looked to do billboards, for example, and artwork was rejected because it had cannabis on it. Now, again, it's just this thing. It's this unaware, you know, it's not there. They're not aware that medical cannabis can actually be prescribed. And when you're trying to explain it to them, they're just like, they don't, it's just pointless. It's one of them. But every time we've tried to advertise, it has been a nightmare. Even as an advocacy service, even if we don't mention cannabis, somebody goes on our website and immediately it's like, nah, we're not doing that because it's just this huge thing. As soon as they see the word cannabis, that's it. And that's the problem that we've got at the moment. And I think that is why we aren't getting more patients and patients aren't connecting, because doctors aren't recommending it in GP surgeries, mixed with the fact that clinics can't advertise properly. I've seen Relief do the underground thing, fantastic. And I hope that more clinics take advantage of that and start publishing more adverts and really pushing the limits. And there definitely needs to be more people that kind of just stand up and go, do you know what, medical cannabis? And people need to, as patients, it's quite difficult sometimes. I can imagine there's anxiety, but word of mouth is so powerful. I mean, half of the cases that we get and people come to us is all word of mouth. We don't advertise. We can't really advertise. So, you know, word of mouth is incredibly powerful. And I feel like patients really shouldn't be scared of telling other people that they think of, you know, their friends and say, listen, you know, I'm on medical cannabis. Have you ever tried medical cannabis? And explaining it to them and actually sitting and having a conversation with people has helped. For example, I've spoken to like 4 or 5 of my friends and they've all tried medical cannabis and they are all still patients to this day. So it's just something that really people should have a conversation with people about. Word of mouth is one of the most powerful marketing methods in the world. I think it should be utilized more. Patients should be more open about it.
And it's almost the easiest one to do as well. That's the thing. But again, it's that it comes back to stigma. People don't like talking about it, even if they are patients. You know, people aren't necessarily that forthcoming, and you can understand why. But again, that doesn't necessarily help the cause. But no, you're right about the kind of advertising. I mean, again, you've probably seen Curaleaf's kind of ad on the TV where it's talking about saying everything except for the word cannabis. You know, it's like, well, I don't have to smoke it, or is it right for me? And you know, and it feels a little bit. But again, they're operating in the within the parameters that they've been given. And I did speak to someone once from Curaleaf, and he said apparently it took a year to get that approved.
And that's with their financial backing. Like, this is the quote, you know, this is it. Right. A lot of the people that we're talking about that want to advertise cannabis do not have the budgets that Medica or Curaleaf or other companies have, or the financial partners to make that happen. It's very difficult, you know, unless you really have that financial backing, you are really not going to get the funds to push that. And it's, again, who you know, and a lot of these people already knew people within these advertising platforms, and it just creates a much easier network for them. It's a lot harder for smaller clinics to do. Yeah,
no, exactly. But again, it always strikes me that, you know, and again, this is not necessary to have a go at clinics, but it doesn't seem to be, they're fighting for the small pool of patients that there are rather than trying to grow the market. And when we talk about things like, you know, there's 1.8 million people self-medicating via the illicit market or legacy market, if we want to call it, then surely they should be going after them. But again, is there necessarily the incentive for people medicating via the illicit market to go through the legal loopholes and go through the kind of, but again, it doesn't seem to be much incentive is the problem. What do you think to that?
I agree. I mean, you know, if you think about the costs of a clinic on top of the prescription and then everything else that clinics like to throw on you, one of the craziest things that ever happened was prescriptions being charged and delivery fees when they're already charging enough for the flower. I promise you, they're charging more than enough. It just, things like that, it shocked me. But again, if it's cheaper to get it illicitly, of course, people are going to get it illicitly. If you think about the people who probably take medical cannabis, a lot of them are on benefits, a lot of them are on disability, and a lot of them don't have the income to supplement the medical cannabis needs. It's difficult, you know, as somebody that's on benefits, it's difficult. It is really, really hard to sit there and essentially try and get medical cannabis and then think about all the costs associated with it. When you know, you could call up somebody on your phone and be like, I just want £10 worth of cannabis. Can I get it? And it's fine. It's you know, it's 10 grams, you know, minimum at the moment. I think we've gone down to 0.5 now. I think there are of 0.5 gram bags that you can get. I think I saw on MedBud.
Oh, okay.
But it's just, you know what I mean? It's a lot different, and a lot of people can't afford it. It's so much easier for me to pick up my phone and just call somebody and be like, listen, I want £10 worth of cannabis, rather than going to a clinic and doing it. And it's just, the clinics aren't making it easier. They're just finding ways to charge patients more.
Yeah,
and
I guess
I think that's the issue as well.
Yeah, I guess in their defense as well, it's almost like, well, they're responding to kind of unfavorable market conditions because everything's, well, for the most part, has to be imported from, you know, wherever it might be, whether it be from Germany, South Africa, Thailand, or, you know, Canada, Australia. Again, that's doing some fair air miles, isn't it, really, to kind of get cannabis into
It is,
when we're probably one of the biggest exporters of medical cannabis in the world, thanks to, you know, was it Jazz Pharmaceuticals, and I think, yeah, it's what I like to say. It's all a bit arse about face.
and you're not wrong at all in that statement. It's a difficult conversation to go into without getting too far into it. But yeah, it is one of them.
But it does become very political quite quickly, and
Exactly.
you know, and again, having that understanding of what's permitted, again, for most people, it feels like, you know, they don't have necessarily someone in their corner kind of guiding them through, you know, I mean, you're told it's legal, you get it from a doctor, you go through you can do everything correct, and you can still have, you know, the police come knocking saying, you know, we've had reports of cannabis, and you can be doing absolutely nothing wrong. And at the same time, it's, you know, you're going to face harassment potentially.
Yeah, and this is it. It's been one of these situations that, you know, it's stupid that for some reason, and as a cannabis user previously, before I was on medical, I was using it illegally. I've got no hesitation in admitting that. But I felt less anxiety when I was actually using illegal because I'd actually be secretive about it. Whereas now, if you actually use a legal prescription, you go outside and somebody's going to give you a weird look, or somebody's going to do something, or even if the police just, you know, had an inkling that it was illegal, it's just going to cause, you know, more engagement with them. And the thing is part of my issue with my anxiety is that I don't want the police pulling me aside, because then I'm thinking, what's going on? It raises my anxiety and it just makes the situation worse. And I'm more fight rather than flight with anxiety, so I'll just start arguing, and it doesn't benefit me, and then the police just get all angry. And lots of patients are like that, so it makes no sense.
It's that whole thing, you know, you feel like you're being told something you thought was wrong is now right, and then they come along and say, well, actually you're wrong, and then you say, well, actually no, I'm right, and then you just end up in this weird sort of cycle of, you know, tit for tat, and it doesn't seem to benefit anyone other than to create, you know, anxiety and, you know, hassle for people who are probably already feeling quite vulnerable.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But this is it. This is, I guess, in terms of sort of initiatives that you're looking to kind of do, we're talking about kind of more and more outreach and things like that. What would you like to be able to do, and what would you like to kind of see happen, you know, with CannCare and more broadly in terms of raising awareness of medical cannabis being legal here in the UK?
Sure. So our actual advocacy that's more so like proactive rather than reactive, for example, that's what we would define it under. Our proactiveness is just trying to reach out to people. We're trying to spark conversations that they wouldn't usually have. So a lot of the times we'll spark a conversation by emailing people. And a big one that we use at the moment is freedom of information requests. So as soon as you submit an FOI, say that right, as soon as you submit one, it usually starts a huge conversation within the council, because everyone's like, what? We have no information on CBPM, so why are they requesting it? And then usually we get an email back like, there's no documentation on CBPMs within this council. Then it sparks a conversation where I can go to the council and be like, listen, there's loads of information from the Cannabis Industry Council here. Why don't you process it and have a look? Unfortunately, a lot of the cases that we have, and it has become the issue, that the education only comes from having discrimination. And unfortunately, that is the biggest issue. A lot of councils won't engage with anybody on this information until a case happens. Some councils just point blank won't even discuss it until.
So they don't have that information. So you, as a kind of play, you sort of say, well, okay, what do you have on this? You know, what's your policy around medical cannabis? And they'll be like, what?
They have no idea. Like, we send them that freedom of information request and they're just like, no idea.
And they won't address it until you've kind of raised it. So it's still very chicken and egg. They don't have the information. They don't even know that it's a thing. So you're having to go to them to kind of advise them of something that they should know about when they actually have no idea.
Correct. That's most of the time. In fact, one of the counsellors that we engaged with recently just point blank told us that even though we had consent from a patient to discuss a case, point blank told us that medical cannabis does not exist and they don't want to speak to us, and that they don't give us permission to deal with some case. Some counsellors are they're just point blank unaware, and they're so naive to it, and it's annoying as a patient myself, but it's more annoying because I know the stress that patients go through, and again, it's such a shame that people won't engage with us until these discrimination cases actually happen, and by then it's too late. It's just too late, and these things shouldn't be happening in the first place. But trying to reach to them before then, it's incredibly difficult. It only happens if we are fortunate enough to have somebody inside of the council that usually has some sort of ability to talk, such as an MP or a counsellor. Usually going the counsellor way or through an MP is a good method. And I'd always suggest to patients that if you are having a problem with something like that, always speak to your MP and counsellor, because they have a legal obligation to make sure that those things are investigated when they do go wrong. But that's usually the only way that we can get through to a council, by speaking to councillors or MPs. It's the only way that we've been successful so far.
So in terms of, I guess, spreading broader awareness of medical cannabis and its legality, that becomes a kind of education initiative. And I suppose, again, we've talked about doing some of these initiatives sort of going through the year. And I think, again, there's so many different sort of touch points, or, places where, cannabis use could be, sort of, in abundance. I mean, we talked about kind of music festivals, or, obviously cannabis social clubs and things like that, and, different events and things like that. And I feel like, do you feel like that's a good way forward? It's a good way to sort of get that information out there and provide the resources that, these organizations, whether it be councils or festival organizers or, social clubs, because again, they won't necessarily have a way of supporting people who are genuinely in need of advice or guidance, or just, so it kind of it doesn't fall to anyone else really, other than, well, no one seems to be spearheading the initiative in a way. And I feel like that's an essential piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and it is. If we could provide education to them, it'd be a lot easier. Unfortunately, and it's a legal standpoint from our point of view. At the moment, we don't have the methods of doing that, because it becomes this big legal problem. So when we've spoken to our solicitor, for example, they've said that if we provided training on it, we'd need to make sure that it was done correctly, like fully by the book, because if liability then goes wrong or something happens, then it becomes on us. And as an advocacy group that's just starting, we are not multimillionaires. We don't have millions of seed funding behind us. It's incredible, and difficult for us to kind of do that kind of thing at this point. But it is something that we definitely divert to places like the Cannabis Industry Council, have great guidance that we quite often, often send links to. We send most emails with, CIC information on, and that tends to be really useful. They trust it a lot more as well, because obviously it's a professional body. So a lot more people trust that information.
Excellent. And again, this is why these kind of industry partnerships are so crucial, because again, they open up access to other parties who can support the broader mission of what you're doing. And again, they're aligned with that and they're sympathetic to it too.
Yeah, massively. Like I said, it was a no-brainer when CIC asked us if we were interested in joining again. We were more than happy to do that. I think that was the quickest approval we've ever sent to everyone. Right. Quickest response.
Well, this is it. But again, it's about and again, this is why I'm very much drawn to the cannabis industry. Is there are a lot of, everyone appreciates the difficulty of operating in the space, whether you be a charity, a cultivator, or a marketer, or whatever, it comes with these challenges. And again, we have to kind of support each other to actually, if we want to see this sort of change, then we all need to be having these sorts of conversations together and partnering up and sharing information and saying, okay, well, if you do this, then we can, if we have an opportunity to educate your patients about, the service we provide, that will help them if they encounter issues. I feel like that seems like a nice way forward as well, in terms of finding common ground with other cannabis organizations.
Massively. Partnerships has been a key thing for us. We've been speaking to a lot of people. We're not shy of messaging or calling people, and we definitely don't want people to be shy of messaging us, even if you're from an organization or from somebody anywhere, even if you're not registered with the Cannabis Industry Council, just approach us. Yeah. We're always happy to have these conversations, and we've always been really open with people, and we love to reach out. The plan with that is, and I'm sure we were going to get onto this at some point, I'll beat you to it, Dave, was that we're hosting events. We have our event in Manchester planned, and we also have one in London, potentially, fingers crossed, that goes ahead near Cannabis Europa. So things like that will spark on, partnership agreements. We'll go in and we'll meet loads of cool people. I'm really excited for it because I really want to meet more of the industry. Fortunately, as Dave quite rightly says, I'm not in London, so I don't have the opportunity of networking with a lot of them in Manchester. So it is a little bit difficult for us, but we're definitely interested in coming to some of these big events and meeting people, and it's going to be really good.
No, absolutely. And again, it's a global industry as well. And I think, again, one of the reasons I like to talk to people from all parts of the world on this podcast about, what they're experiencing, because again, the similar issues will crop up time and again, whether you're in the US or the UK or Mexico or Germany or something like that. Everyone encounters this at some point. So there's a need for understanding or just providing that information, advice, and guidance on things. But like you say, it comes from that collaboration. It's not necessarily about funding. I mean, that's a good means to an end, but at the same time, it's about having that initiative and having that collaboration. And I think that's something I'm certainly keen for us to kind of nurture moving forwards with the rest of the industry. So yeah, that's cool. So how can people get in touch with you? How can we join? There is a membership model, isn't there? So tell us more.
There's a membership model. So we obviously originally we had the plan of just charging for membership, but we decided that's not the right thing. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't align with our values. Not everybody want or can afford membership. And it's not something that we wanted to start eliminating people from. So our membership model was that you can either pay £29 a year, or you can sign up for a free membership. And paying does not mean that you get more benefits, and having a free membership does not mean you get less benefits. It's accessible to everyone, and it's really just dependent on that person's situation. Even if you had the money, but you didn't feel like you wanted to pay, that's fine, no problem. We're not going to ask for evidence or any of that. We just want to be able to support patients. And if people feel like that's worth a value, they are more than welcome to pay for membership. It all goes back into the organization, and the way that we set up our limited company is guaranteed that it's limited by guarantee. We can't take profit as directors. We can't just withdraw the money and run off. It's not the same. It's not the same situation.
That's the only reason I wanted to join. I thought there was going to be, a bill.
No, sorry, Dave. We can't run off with the money. It's all right. No. But in all seriousness, if you want to get in contact with us, go on to CannCare.uk. You can contact us through team@CannCare.uk or our phone number. We always have friendly staff ready to answer 24 hours a day as well. So if you're ever having a really hard time or a difficult time, do not hesitate to pick up that phone and speak to us. Another thing that we always have a really big question on is are we confidential? Do we actually have a confidential service? Always. Unless you are threatening to harm or do anything like that, a bit like a doctor surgery, really. As long as you're not doing something that's, crazy illegal or putting somebody at risk, then we have no reason to disclose the information. So anything that you call our team about, it always stays between us. We're never going to disclose that unless we had to for safety purposes, of course. But we are a really nice open bunch, and we definitely want to speak to more people. Even if you just got a question, you don't need to have a membership or anything. Just give us a call and we're happy to help.
Absolutely. Very good. And it's CannCare as in CannCare.uk.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, a lot of people get that mixed. They always think it's .co.uk. It's not .co.uk. It's .uk.
Yeah, that's it. No, good stuff. No, and again, there's a lot of work ahead. There's a lot that needs to happen, but I feel like, it's one foot in front of the other, one day at a time, to kind of help, raise awareness, help catalyze that change, and just, draw attention to, the fact that medical cannabis is legal, and when people encounter problems, then there is a service that can support them in varying degrees. And I think, there needs to be a bit more of that. And, I'm sure we'll find some interesting cases and, conversations that we'll have with people moving forward. And, you're already making a difference. So well done for that. And no, it's been great to talk to you. And we shall speak soon again, sir.
I'm sure we shall.
Indeed. And thank you so much for coming on. And I'll put all the links in the bio and so forth. And thank you very much for coming on.
No problem. Nice speaking to you.
Cheers, Callum. Thanks.
See you.